Welcome, students, to another session of lectures by Lobezi. I'm your host, Dr. Lobezi. Today we'll be talking about English constitutionalism, with our primary focus being the English Civil War and those events that led up to it, and then, of course, the events that followed, um, sort of the fallout of the Civil War. All right. So the first thing, though, before just to kind of frame this a little bit, we need to back up a little bit and provide a little context. Um, Throughout this course, we've talked about the consolidation of power by monarchs at the expense of other groups, primarily the Catholic Church and nobles. We've seen that taking place in England, already France, and Spain with a group known as the New Monarchs. And as we continued, we discussed absolutism. And we have seen the trend where the monarchs of Spain, primarily Philip II, and in France, under the guidance of Cardinal Richelieu, and then French absolutism kind of fully blossoming under Louis XIV. That trend won't extend into England. All right. Although at the end of the Tudor dynasty, especially under the reign of Elizabeth I, we see a very strong and powerful monarch, but it will never rise to the level of absolutism. Okay. So why is that? Well, first we have to go all the way back to the year 1215 to a date that precedes the beginning of this course, and that is with the passage of a very important document known as the Magna Carta. And this was done to rein in, this document was passed by Parliament, the legislative body that exists in England, and it was done so to rein in the power of the monarchy. Okay, and so it acts sort of as a constitution, a document which establishes the rule of law within England, and it makes the king subject to that, so that he or any monarch, a female for that example, or for that mindset, might be able to somehow step outside the law, make its own law, or defy existing laws. Okay, so that's something that's very important to note. There was also something known as the due process of law that the Magna Carta creates. So what that does is it offers protection to the English subjects so that they can't be imprisoned because a monarch views them as an enemy of the crown. They must receive due process, which means they must be brought before a court of law, and they must have the law in which they've broken, sort of brought before them formal charges. So they can't. England has protections put in place to guard against political prisoners. So a lot of that's very important. Then also, the reason why we don't see the level of power in England that we see in other European countries is because of Parliament, and most particularly the House of Commons, the lower house, which has the power of the purse. And so, because it has the ability to prevent funds from going to a monarch, they certainly have the ability to check or limit the power of the monarch. All right, so want to pick up here with the end of Elizabeth's reign, and with that will be the end of the Tudor dynasty, which began with Henry VII after the War of the Roses. She dies having never married, and then of course having had any children. And so, to prevent a crisis of secession, she passes her throne to her cousin, her first cousin once removed. And who is this? This is actually the son of her first cousin, whom she had beheaded, Mary, Queen of Scots. So it's Mary Stuart's son, James VI, who is James VI in Scotland. But when he ascends to the throne in England, he will be known as James I and the first of the Stuart line. He agrees to rule according to English laws and customs, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't believe in divine right, the divine right theory, that his power is vested in his hands by God and that he is not answerable to anybody. But that is, what he believes, but yet that's certainly not the case. And this is going to cause him to have a very contentious relationship with Parliament, his belief in divine right, and of course they're unwilling to give him absolute control. All right, so that's going to be one of the problems that he will deal with during his reign. And then secondly, he has some religious problems, and that is mainly with the Puritans. And you may recall these are the English Calvinists who get the name Puritans because they want to purify the Church of England of all Catholic practices. And he does not deal well with these Puritans, and it should be noted who some of the leading Puritans are. There are many of England's gentry, who are those well-to-do landowners, sort of below the level of the nobility, but that make up a substantial part of the House of Commons. So this was certainly unwise of him to attempt to persecute them as he did. All right. Well, one final note, though, with regard to religion, that is not what you would expect, but it was something that satisfied all Protestants within England, and that is he had published a Protestant Bible known as the King James Version. All right, and so from this day forward, there are slight variations that exist with the Protestant King James Version of the Bible and then the Catholic Vulgate. In fact, there is even a difference of certain books that exist in the Catholic Vulgate that don't appear in the King James Version. But that's just a little side note about his reign. He is, for the most part, able to, avoid any major conflicts, but the same cannot be said for his son, who succeeds his father in 1625, and that, of course, is Charles I. Because Parliament wants to make it very clear that the king is subject to the authority, or at least the oversight and approval of Parliament, they pass what is known as the Petition of Right, and they stipulate that the king would have to accept that before they would be willing to, give him any tax revenues. And so that is something that, at least initially, he's willing to go along with, but over time, he realizes that he doesn't want to. And so his attempt to try to circumvent Parliament is perpetrated where he doesn't call them into session. So from 1629 to 1640, he's able to rule under his own steam, but in order to generate revenue, he comes up with a way to collect taxes and something known as ship money. And this is a levy or a tax on seacoast towns that pay for coastal defense, and then he is able to use this funding for the government without, as I said, having to call into session Parliament. His religious policies are going to cause things to come to a head, however, when he allows the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, to extend the Anglican Common Book of Prayer over the people of Scotland, who you might recall are fully Calvinists. They're known as the official church in Scotland is the Presbyterian Church, but William Laud attempts to force religious unity upon the people of Scotland with the Common Book of Prayer, and the result of this is a Scottish rebellion. Okay, this really brings things to a head for the king. Charles is forced to call Parliament into session because he needs funds to raise an army in defense of the Scots, or in defense against the Scots. So Parliament takes this opportunity to pass a series of laws that limit the power of Charles and all English monarchs for that matter. But he takes an opportunity where there is some division within Parliament, and the division is over how far they want to go to try to reform or limit the powers of the monarch. And he takes that division, or takes advantage of that, or attempts to take advantage of that, and then he tries to have those members who are in favor of the strictest restraints, in favor of placing very strict restraints on him, he tries to have them arrested. Okay. And so all of Parliament responds to that action as sort of as an act of war, as a treasonous act by the king, and they raise an army. Okay, and so this is what gives rise to the English Civil War, 1642 to 1648. Now, the king and his supporters are known as Cavaliers, and at least initially they had success. If you would look at it on paper, it looked as if the Cavaliers would be victorious, but that's certainly not going to be the case. The Roundheads, that is the force that fights against the Royalists, and that includes most members of the House of Commons. After a few years of fighting, they elevate one Oliver Cromwell to the head of the parliamentary army, and he introduces something known as the New Model Army. And what is pretty interesting is a reform that he introduces into the military, and that is that officers are going to be selected based on merit and skill rather than their social class. So this is the first time we've seen this happen anywhere in Europe. Before long, it'll take time for this to catch on, but before long, merit will be something that will be utilized by militaries across Europe. That, along with just strict discipline, is enough to help the parliamentary army defeat the Cavaliers, and actually they capture Charles I on the field of battle. Okay, so Parliament has a trial, and he is found guilty of treason, and his punishment is ultimately beheading. Okay, and so in 1649, England executes its first king. Okay, and so this is a big deal. This has repercussions across Europe, and everyone is watching what happens. So the order, just to throw this out here, because there's 4 kings that we have to talk about, and it can be confusing for students to sort of remember. So you have James and then Charles, and then we're going to enter into a period where there is no king, where there is and I'll be getting into that in just a second, where there's going to be, England will become a republic, and their leader will be a military dictator, Oliver Cromwell. But then after that, when the monarchy is restored, we'll have Charles II and James II. So the order is James, Charles, followed by Charles, James. And in the middle, that's where Oliver Cromwell goes. Okay, so James, Charles, Charles, James, divided by Oliver Cromwell. Okay, so there is a period of time, 1649 to 1658, where there is no monarchy in England, and that is because they are known as a protectorate, or a commonwealth or republican form of government. On paper, that's what or theoretically, that's what they're supposed to be, but in actuality, it's a military dictatorship because the army controls the government and Oliver Cromwell controls the military. So essentially, this protectorate is nothing more than a dictatorship. Okay? So some of the things that take place is that obviously there is no monarchy anymore. That's dissolved, as is the House of Lords, which is the upper house of Parliament, and the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. And that's because Oliver Cromwell is a Puritan, okay? And so that becomes the dominant religion, all right? And so there's a lot of things that take place, not on a political standpoint, but from like a social standpoint, that are reminiscent of kind of what happened in Geneva, Switzerland under John Calvin. And it stands to reason because the Puritans are Calvinists, all right? And so they try to implement morality, a very strict form of Christian morality on the people of England, and it states that, you know, sports were forbidden, theaters were closed, taverns and gambling were outlawed, and so that made for a very, you know, rigid type of lifestyle for many, something that most English were not accustomed to. Another social effect, though, is the importance that these Puritans placed on education, because it was important for all to read the Bible. So the number of schools that were made available to the people, to boys and girls of all classes, is noteworthy. Let's see, what else? Cromwell does offer religious tolerance to all Protestants, and in fact to Jews, but just not Roman Catholics. In fact, he attempts to outlaw Catholicism, not just in England, but in Ireland as well, and that leads to some atrocities where hundreds of thousands of Irish Catholics are killed, and this is something that even today causes, we'll just say there's no love loss between Ireland and England even today, okay, and that stems from that. So after the death of Oliver Cromwell, the people of England sort of sour on this idea of a republic. They want the monarchy restored, and so that's what happens with Charles I's eldest son when he's allowed to ascend to the throne in 1660. Okay, so he, for the most part, flies under the radar of Parliament. He does some things that upset the religious balance in England, but nothing that's going to cause him to be unseated or overthrown. Okay. However, when he dies, the throne is going to be passed to his brother, who is a Catholic, and so this creates openly he's a Catholic, and so this is going to create some challenges. There's a law that was passed, that the Test Act, that was to prevent any, was supposed to prevent Catholics from assuming any high-ranking positions within the government. So obviously, that's defied. But the reason why that is allowed to take place is because when James II comes to the throne, he does so as an old man, okay? And his heirs are two girls, his two daughters, and they're both Protestants. So for most people in England, they feel like they can wait it out, and then once a new line of monarchs is established, then they could put this behind them. Well, his wife dies, his first wife, and he marries again, and he has a young son, and this is what causes the situation to a head, brings things to a head. So when his second wife gives birth to a son, which represents a new line of Catholic kings in England, Parliament decides to act. Okay, so they go to his eldest daughter, Mary, who happens to be married to William of Orange of Holland, and Parliament invites them to invade and eventually sit on the throne jointly, sit on the throne of England, and that's exactly what happens. This period is known as the Glorious Revolution. It's seen as a bloodless overthrow because James II, instead of staying and fighting, decides to flee in exile to France. Okay, so the period of this bloodless overthrow is known as the Glorious Revolution, and this is going to bring William and Mary to the throne. Okay, but before they are coronated, they have to agree to serious reforms, and there is a collection of reforms that are just collectively known as the English Bill of Rights, and essentially this elevates the position of Parliament to sort of equal authority with the monarch, so that you could look at it as it's lifting or empowering Parliament, but also at the same time sort of weakening the monarchy. So there is a series of reforms and limitations placed on what the monarch can do. Okay, so what we're left with at the end of the Glorious Revolution is something known as limited monarchy. All right, and so that's where you still have a parliament, but he has to, or the parliament, you still have a monarchy, but they have to rule along with parliament and abide by a written constitution. Okay, so that's pretty much brings everything to a close, with the exception of one thing. Okay. And that is, over time, the sort of balance that exists during the Glorious Revolution between Parliament and monarchy begins to sort of change over time, and Parliament will become even more powerful, and so the power of the monarchy into the 18th century will continue to decline. And then one last thing that's important to note is the emergence of a figure who is a member of Parliament but serves as a very important minister to the crown, and that position over time will be called the Prime Minister. Okay, and so Robert Walpole is the very first Prime Minister that serves in England today. The Prime Minister would be the equivalent of the American president. He is sort of the lead executive, but he is selected, or she can be she. That person, the Prime Minister, is selected from the Parliament. So whichever party has a majority within Parliament selects one of its own members of Parliament to serve as the Prime Minister. So that is something that takes place in the 18th century, in the first half of the 18th century. So the emergence of the prime minister position in England. All right, so thank you for watching. That does that wraps things up for this installment of Lectures by Lobisi. Thank you.